ain't going back. Not gonna buy into all that. Hey, hey, ain't gonna hide. Gonna let all the fears slide. Got mother nature, it's on my side. Got all of the loving growing inside.
Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to the New Now. I am here once again with Jerry Marzinsky. We are going to do our next installment of Mind Monsters 5. We will call this one Prison Voices. Jerry has gone through what we could call the crazy institutions, if you'll pardon my pun, 40 years, retired psychotherapist in some of the most violent and interesting institutions in the United States. He is retired, working with private practice. And hey, Jerry, how's it going? Welcome to the show.
It's going good. Good to be back again.
Yeah, delighted. So, last time we promised we were going to go into that yellow binder I see over Jerry's right shoulder here. Jerry's taken the time to pull one of the cases from there and put it in front. And so now let's get into it, Jerry. Let's hear a bit of background on the case that you've pulled. Was this fellow in prison originally?
Yeah, this guy was in prison. He's probably been there a few times prior. He was hearing voices at the time I met him. This is one of the cases who fully recovered after working with him.
So
we disrupted the voices and got him on a somewhat spiritual path.
Why was he in prison? Do you know? Do you remember?
Oh, I know. I have that here. It was all kinds of stuff. Let me see. Let me see what he did. So he'd been in jail 6 times. He'd received probation 3 times. His father was a chronic alcoholic, extremely abusive, drug history of alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, heroin, amphetamines. Never looked for treatment. He had 36 arrests under his belt, many times for burglary. His behavior became increasingly serious and consisted of kidnapping, aggravated assault, DUI, armed robbery. He was diagnosed bipolar and paranoid schizophrenic by the psychiatric mafia. He'd been hospitalized several times in California for depression, had several suicide attempts. You see, he was awarded $166,000 for an injury he had, and he spent it all on drugs.
So what sort of what sort of injury was he? Shopping or something that happened, or how did he? Do you know?
I don't see that here.
All right. So he sued someone, I'm guessing, for something or other.
He won a lawsuit of something or other.
Okay. Spent it all on drugs, I guess. It's not a lot of
Spent it
money.
all on drugs. He was full of cocaine. He sideswiped a van, then drove into oncoming traffic, causing a collision. They found 900 milligrams of cocaine in his pants. And he was sentenced to prison, where I met him for the first time in March of 2002.
Okay, so give us a bit of background. How did that come about? You were working in one of the prisons at the time, and how did you meet him in the first place?
Golly. Well, anybody who came into this prison unit, I got to interview. Just in talking to him, I found out first he denied. I remember him denying that he heard voices. So what I have here is, and I don't know. I think I told you before. I can't do this with anything else in my life. But back then, if I wrote down on the interesting cases, if I wrote down within 24 hours of the time that I interviewed these guys, I could remember line by line what was said. I found it very interesting. So that's one thing. But I can't do that with anything else in my life. And if I waited more than 24 hours, chunks of it started disappearing. So what I did is afterward, I'd scribble down the transcripts, word for word. So what we have here is back when I was actually investigating the voices and was figuring out that these things were not hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia insists.
Mm.
They have absolutely no evidence. They've never done any research whatsoever into the voices. Just they're pure arrogance. We say they're hallucinations because we say so. That's it. They've got no backing for it whatsoever, other than they don't understand what it is.
Mm.
So I've been studying the voices for years, ever since back in the, I think it was it 1975. Back when I was working in the one of the biggest psychiatric hospitals on the planet. And so I've got several years under my belt before I got to this point.
Okay.
I had 7 years at that big psychiatric hospital, questioning patients about the voices and what they were saying and how they acted. But I couldn't. There, I got caught twice by psychiatrists asking patients questions about their voices. And both times I was pulled up on the carpet and told not to do that because the voices were hallucinations. And by asking questions about the hallucinations, I was reinforcing the hallucinations and making the patient worse. Now, I didn't see that at all.
Of course.
They did get a little bit upset because the voices don't like people asking questions about them. So one of them went and told the psychiatrist, "Oh, he upset me because he was asking me questions about my voices," and I ended up on the carpet. So psychiatry didn't want anybody digging into this, based on the 2 times I'd been pulled up on it.
Right.
So I couldn't freely speak to these guys while I was at the state hospital. I think psychiatry was a little bit afraid of these people because they were being assaulted by them at a horrendous rate. I have the statistics somewhere, but the assault rate on psychiatrists by schizophrenics was equivalent to the assault rate by schizophrenics on attendants that were working with these guys 24 hours a day. Yeah. So these guys, the psychiatrists, only saw them for maybe 20 minutes a month. And it always puzzled me. It's like, what are they doing to these people to get assaulted when they're only seeing them 20 minutes a month?
Mm.
And it was assault after assault after assault. So I think they were a little bit afraid of these guys. They didn't want to do anything to upset them. So the unwritten law at the psychiatric hospital was you don't do anything to upset schizophrenics that you don't absolutely have to do, to bring them under control. But in the prison, it was a little different, so where I got in trouble with, the patient going to the psychiatrist and complaining that I was picking into their heads and asking questions about what the voices were telling them. At the state prison, if any of them went to the warden or the psychiatrist there and said, "Oh, he's asking us questions about the voices," and we're upset, they get out of my face. They wouldn't have any standing whatsoever. It's like, get out of here. So for years, I was able to freely ask them questions about what the voices were doing, what they were saying, how they were acting, and most importantly, the things that I was experimenting with that would disrupt the voices, because I saw that they were running patterns. So if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations. Hallucinations are random. So psychiatry doesn't know enough to see that they're running patterns, because in their mind, they're hallucinations because they can't figure out what else they would be.
Sure. I've got my reasons and my suspicions as to what's going on with those voices and why they don't even want to be looked at, and why the psychiatrist won't look at them either. but I guess you've had some direct experiences in your way with the prisoners and people you work with, and so you were freer, so to speak, in the prison than you were in the hospitals to study the voices, how you felt, could, like, what was your intent in doing this with this fellow? Like, we're going to get to the case in a moment, but so you came across this fellow, you picked up his case one way or the other. What did you want to do with him at the time? You said, oh my goodness, I'm going to talk to this guy. Like, what were you thinking and feeling as a man going to talk to another man supposedly crazy, and what kind of results were you looking for?
Well, first of all, I was still trying to figure out how these things operated,
Right.
what the patterns were. I did have enough patterns down at this time to know that they weren't hallucinations. I
Right.
wasn't sure what they were. Okay. I'm not quite sure where this happened in the scheme of things. I don't remember what happened before or after, but there was one inmate I was working with where the voices actually came through and said, you have no right to interfere with our way of life.
Sure.
And that it blew me away. I mean, my denial system collapsed at that point. So what I'm doing is taking you right into one of the, several of the sessions
Okay.
that I've had with this particular guy. And at the time, at the time I was fishing. I was looking for ways to disrupt the voices, ways that experimenting, giving them, okay, try this, come back and tell me what happened last week. And I had an agreement with the maybe 10 or 15 of them that if they would tell me in real time what the voices were telling them, that I would do everything I could to help them.
By help them, you mean get the voices quiet or help them?
Well, whatever I could do. With the Indians, I would get them help get them firewood. Whatever I could legally do to help them out.
Gotcha.
If they needed extra sessions, all they had to do was throw some pebbles at my window, and I'd get them in as soon as I could.
So this was in the prison, though. Like
this was in the prison.
How do you get Indians firewood in the prison?
There's Indians in the prison.
They need firewood.
I'm in Arizona. There are a lot of Indians in the prison.
Oh, I just didn't know. I guess they had fireplaces, is what you mean, in the prison as well. I didn't know that.
Oh, they had not fireplaces, but firewood. So they had their meetings. They had.
Oh, I see. Outside. Gotcha.
Prayer meetings when they had their fires and stuff like that.
Okay.
So this took place on 3/19/2002, and he comes in that morning and he says, "I've got a bad case of the flu." I said, "Do you want to go back to your tent and get back to sleep?" So at this point, they were sleeping in tents, and he said, "Yeah." I said, "Fill me in on how you've been doing last week quickly. Have you been doing the things that I told you to do to feel better?" So one of the things that the voices want is for them to feel miserable. They don't want them to do anything to make themselves feel better. Their goal is to keep the guy as miserable as possible and generate as much negative emotional energy as they can. And then they'll attack, and that energy will dissipate. So there's a one-to-one correspondence between the voices attacking paranoid schizophrenics and their energy level dropping.
Sure.
Okay. So I think I knew at that time that the voices were actually taking their energy from them. They were parasites. They're energetic parasites.
Sure.
So he said, "Yeah, I bought myself a radio, some candy, and some food." So he's starting to treat himself a little better. I said, "Have the voices complained about you doing things to make yourself feel better?" He says, "No." I said, "Have you been hearing them at all?" He said, "Yeah, they're still there." Is it just a feeling in your head now, or are you actually hearing them? He said, "I'm actually hearing them." What are they telling you? He said, they're making me paranoid. They're telling me the people are out to get me. I said, "Can you actually hear them, or are they just like a fog you had in your head the last time we talked?" So he said sometimes he can't hear them, but he can feel them. And he said they felt like they were clogging up his head. And he says, "I can actually hear them. they're telling me to watch out for this guy and that guy. I said, did they pick the same people all the time, or did they tell you to watch out for different people? He said, they pick different people. Are those people actually threatening you? He said, no. So they don't even have sense enough to pick the same people all the time. He said, no. I said, are you praying preemptively like you did before? So one of the things the voices don't like is for the people who they infest to pray to God or Jesus or whatever positive deity they may have. They don't like it. So he found that praying, you can pray them away. If he kept praying long enough, praying the 23rd Psalm, some other stuff, if he battered them with that, they would sometimes go away. I said, are you praying preemptively like you did before? So praying before they showed up. He said, yes. Do they still go away? Yes. Then what is happening? Well, sometimes I get busy and I forget and they come. So that's one of the things the voices do, is get the patient to forget to do the things that they need to do to keep them away. I said, do they go away when you pray after they show up at these times? And he goes, yeah. I said, when do they strike the most often? They come early in the evening when everything's quiet, right before I go to bed or while I'm laying there. So they'll hit after the sun goes down most often. They'll hit first thing in the morning when the guy's charged up, and they'll hit at about 3 a.m, wake the guy up, and then he starts hearing voices. He said they come early in the evening when everything's quieting down, right before I go to bed while I'm laying there. I said, what we're doing here is reverse engineering what the voices have done. We're taking everything that they are doing and doing the opposite. Hopefully at some point we'll be able to reduce your medications. The meds are hard on you and cause untold damage. But as long as you are hearing voices, you need to be on them. I'd be very hesitant to ask them to be reduced at this point. So let's try some other stuff. You know that they come at night. What I'd like you to do is to remember to pray for help to keep them away at night when you're most vulnerable.
So at the time you had told him, while he's hearing the voices, he should stay on his meds? Or you recommend?
Because what happens is, if they're coming as frequently as they are with him, I need to be able to get through to him. And if he goes off his meds, the voices get much stronger. So, I'm telling him to stay on his meds until we weaken them somewhat more.
Have you changed your perspective since then on the meds, I'm guessing?
No. There's some people that I'm working with right now that I would not be able to reach them if they weren't on meds. Spoke to one this morning. They were on heavy meds. They were gorked up, but I could reach them. I could get through to them.
You mean the antipsychotics that they?
Yes.
Like, do you prescribe those as well?
Oh, no, I'm not a psychiatrist.
You're not a psychiatrist. So this is just something some psychiatrists prescribe these meds, and then they're talking to you in your private practice in relation to what's going on inside their head, so to speak.
Right. And there comes a time where the voices start dissipating, where I'll ask them to ask the psychiatrist to reduce their meds. Now psychiatrists have the opinion that schizophrenia is it's a life sentence. That is not the case. That is far from the case. But as long as they believe it and they get their patients to believe it, they're dishing out drugs constantly. And those drugs cure absolutely nothing. The only reason they work is because they are major tranquilizers and they calm the patients down. So when they're calmed down and they're drugged up, the voices can't get them very upset.
Have you come across anything besides the psychiatric medical suggestions that you think could work for these patients? Something less, let's say, poisonous? I know.
You mean as far as drugs?
As far as, anything really, meditation, drugs, something that would help them get off there.
Meditation is hard for them because the voices don't want their minds calm. So that they will attack more vehemently when they try to quiet their minds. I known some exorcists that were able to get rid of them for a while,
Hmm.
but if they don't change the way they their personal frequency, they come right back.
Right.
So it's like the Bible says, you clean out the house, but if you don't fill it with good stuff, they come back twice as bad, and they do. I've seen it happen.
Right.
So he knows that he can pray, and they don't like that, and that drains them when he does that. Um, so I gave him some stuff to do and asked him to keep track of what happens. I said, now the other thing, and this will be a lot more difficult, but it may be more effective. Do you think you can pray for them to move on and have peace? He says, yeah, I think I can do that. So I would give him stuff to try, and then bring him back a week later and say, okay, what happened?
So you mean like mental exercises, so to speak?
Yeah,
Or,
yeah,
right.
like this. Okay, pray for them, see what happens.
Okay.
Because they definitely don't like prayer. They don't like the Bible.
Well,
Uh,
how did you come across that suggestion to give it to them? Like, obviously it didn't come out of the blues. You said pray for them. Like, what made you feel that could work?
it just popped into my head. Back, years before, I found out the patients were telling me that when they recited the 23rd Psalm, the voices reacted like worms thrown on a hot frying pan.
So you kind
And
of
and
sit.
I'd heard that a few times in between there. So I started asking patients, here, try the 23rd Psalm, see how they react to it. They don't like it.
Why
They
do you think
don't like it.
why do you
And I'm
think
not
that
a
is?
Bible thumper. Well, apparently it's their nature. They don't want anything like that. They don't want anything to do with God. They don't want anything to do with the Bible. They don't want nothing to do with preachers, and they don't want their victim to do anything with preachers or the Bible either. They don't want them reading the Bible. But I found out that again, experimenting with this, I found out that it all has to do with how strong they are. So I found out in the state hospital that the voices didn't like the patients going to church. And I found that broke down into three categories. If the voices were weak and the patient went to church, the voices would shut up. If they were of medium strength and the patient went to church, the voices would get louder and try to drown out what the preacher was saying.
Hmm.
And they would try to get them to leave. If they, I found that if the voices were very strong and they tried to go to church, they would drive them right out. They'd get up
Mhm.
and they would actually run out of the church.
Really interesting.
So they didn't like church. They didn't like preachers. They didn't like God. They didn't like Jesus. They didn't like anything to do with religion.
Really.
So what kind of hallucination would do that? Why would a hallucination not like the church or the 23rd Psalm or God or Jesus or want anything to do with religion? And it's consistent. It was consistent among virtually all the schizophrenics. Their voices did not want anything to do with religion, the church, God, or Jesus.
So they're sending them, I would guess, nice energy, it seems, or loving energy, the opposite of the fear-based energy, perhaps, that they live in. Like, did you
Yeah.
suggest any other kind of non-religious based but similar feeling sort of exercises for them? Like loving thoughts or happy ideas or positive ways to
Well,
be alive, things like that. I'm
the
just curious.
earlier I said do some good things for yourself.
Hmm. Okay.
So there's more coming up. So that, I'm kind of experimenting as I go along. So I asked him, do you think you can do that? He said, okay, I'll try and let's see what happens. So he was as curious about his voices as I was. He wasn't sure what they were, or why they were doing that, and nobody else would give him the time of day. I mean, the other psychologists, psychiatrists at the prison, their hallucinations just ignore them. And if they ignored them, they got louder. You can't just ignore them. They will not tolerate that. They get louder. Yeah. Uh, so let me say, I said, in the meantime, I'd like to keep you doing good things for yourself. Keep adding to your list. Keep reading your Bible and keep going to church. I asked, do you have anyone out in the prison yard who you can do reality checks with to see if they also feel that whoever the voices are telling you is going to hurt you really seem to have something in it for you. He said, nobody I can trust.
Mm.
You know that if you act out on what these voices are telling you and you hit someone, then what they're telling you is going to come true and you'll have a real reason to be paranoid. He said, yeah, I understand that. So the voices are always telling him these guys are plotting against you. You know, you ought to hit them first, which would instant fight, you know, right there. He said, okay, make sure you don't act on what the voices are telling you. You know that you can choose to listen to what they have to say or blow it off, just like you can with your own thoughts. You also know what happens if you resist what they're telling you. They get stronger. If their messages just float through your head like clouds blowing through, that's and you don't resist them. That's the thing to do. If that doesn't work and you find that you are resisting praying for help, then you can come here. I said, go back to bed now and let me know how you make out next week. Okay, so and that was one of the earlier sessions. Okay, on 8/1/2002, he said the voices have started coming back once a day now. So when I first started working with them, they were there the majority of the time. So as he starts, and that's one thing schizophrenics need to know. They can't just sit there and take the beating that these things are dishing out. These things are like bullies. You know, they'll knock you down and they'll keep kicking. They won't let up. If you don't stand up to them and fight back, you're done. You know, they'll just keep going until they take you over. You can't just sit there and take it. So he said they start coming back once a day now. So that was like down from almost all the time to once a day. He said, I can feel them in the wings. They start off whispering by saying, how are you? And I said, what do you do? He said, I completely ignore them and start praying. I don't talk to them at all. I totally ignore them. And if you give them any recognition at all, they put their foot in the door. So, you know, he acknowledges that they're there and then he starts praying to get them away. Right? Said, how long does it take for them to go away once you start praying and asking for help? About 15 minutes, he says. How about the fits they usually throw when you ignore them? Do they go ballistic on you? He said, no. I have to give them some time a day before they can get into throwing their hissy fits. So he's saying, he has to acknowledge that they're there before they start kicking in. I said, do you have a whole lot more peace in your life than before? He said, oh, yes, much more. I asked him, do you miss the voices? He said, no, not anymore. He said, I used to. They used to be more a part of me than I was. I asked him, are they the same voices you had been hearing for years? They don't change? He said, nope, they're the same ones. They don't change. So I found that interesting. It's the same voices that have been plaguing him for years. I said, how many voices continue to come and visit you now? He says, 2. So that's another thing. As the patient starts getting better, the number of voices start disappearing. The weakest ones disappear first. The strongest ones are harder to get rid of. I asked him, is that the same number of voices as before, or is it less? He said, it's one less. Was the one who disappeared one of the weaker ones? He said, no, it was the strongest one. And that surprised me. I said, really? He said, yes. I said, what do you think happened to him? He said, I've been praying on a regular basis now. It seemed that the strongest one couldn't stand the constant prayer. Have you forged a better link with the positive spirits? So he was also feeling positive spirits. He said, yes. The demons try to disguise themselves as good spirits. So that's one of the things they do to start off with. When they first get into the head of a schizophrenic, they try to convince the person that they are positive spirits, that they have special powers that they can help the guy with, and they do. I've seen meth addicts, their voices would tell them, where to be when they run out of meth, where to be and when to be there. And somebody would show up with the meth. They would tell them which houses to rob, when to rob them, when the occupants of the house were up and when to get out and where to hide from the police. So they know stuff that the person himself doesn't know. I said, what do the good spirits do for you? He said, they help me pray when the bad ones come. The prayers get louder inside and overcome the bad voices. What kinds of things do the good spirits tell you? They tell me to be appreciative of what I have and I'll get more. They tell me to stay in prayer and to give thanks for what's around me. So a lot of times the good spirits don't speak in words, and in his case, apparently they were. They usually speak in feelings and intuition. Okay, so that was the end of that session. The next one is 8/12/2002. The voices, he said, the voices still been coming for about 15 minutes a day. It now takes about 10 minutes to pray them away. He said, I'm still not responding to them at all. I don't ask them any more questions. See, that's another thing. To interact with them reinforces them. So, here's the psychiatrist telling me that if I talk to them, that they get louder. If the patient talks to them, they get louder. They get stronger. I said, what do they say when they come? He said, they ask me what's going on, what's happening. I said, what happens when you ignore them? As soon as they start affecting me, I pray them away. I said, they don't throw tantrums or resist leaving? He said, no, I start praying immediately. I don't give them a chance to get their foot in the door. I said, how about at night when they attack? They've stopped coming at night, so he's getting better. Now they're coming during the day. I said, is the time it takes you to get rid of them decreasing, or is it about the same? He said, it's about the same, about 10 minutes of prayer to get rid of them. He said, I asked him, I wonder what's going on. It seems that they would get bored and move on. What do you think is going on there? He said, I don't know. I asked him, their number has decreased from 4 to 2, right? He said, right. So apparently there were 4 when we started. Have you had any contact with your mother on the positive side? So this was interesting also, was that his mother's deceased and he could hear his mother's voice. And I was suspicious when I found that out. So I kept checking, did your mother tell you to do anything negative? Did she say anything bad? Because I knew they could disguise themselves as his mother if they wanted to, but it was always negative. It was always, no, they don't tell me anything bad. They don't say anything bad. And I said, well, what do they tell you? And he said, well, they tell me to, wear clean underwear, change my clothes, take a shower, don't use drugs, don't hang around with the gangsters, the kind of stuff a mother would say. So I would always check in with him about, has he heard anything from his mother? And it was always mother stuff. So,
what do you make of that? If obviously, I would say, he probably can't hear his mother's voice. Something else is going on. But what's your take on that?
No, I was real suspicious for months. I think it was actually his mother, because at the very end, after the voices had completely left, he said, "My mother wants to talk to you." And this was this what the chief psychologist did when he found out that these guys were getting better. He's going, well, this guy's doing something. He's doing something. They don't get better. He's doing something. And they moved me to a Spanish speaking unit where I couldn't work with these people.
So why do you think the psychiatrists are doing that? And besides protecting their paychecks, I want to ask you a bit of an esoteric question here. Do you think perhaps the psychiatrists also are invaded by these voices and are working against the healing in the fifth column, so to speak?
I think the psychologist, it wasn't a psychiatrist that moved me. It was the psychology supervisor.
Right.
Yeah, and I think he was in league with them. because when he learned that these guys were getting better, I expected him to, now I didn't tell him because I didn't trust him,
Right.
but some of the patients told the investigator, another psychologist, that they were sent down there to investigate me to see what I was doing.
Right.
And the patients, the prisoners I was working with didn't tell them anything.
So,
They knew what they were up to,
so,
and they didn't tell them anything, which really pissed them off.
so it's interesting. So if the psychologists are working with the monsters, so to speak, right? And I have that suspicion as well, keeping them enslaved and chained, to their food source. Wouldn't it be interesting to see the psychologists as crazy as the schizophrenics, but more clever in keeping their voices to themselves?
Well, I'm not sure the psychologist heard voices. I mean, my supervisor, I knew him real well before he started taking orders from the chief psychologist to, investigate what I was doing. Now, he was gay. That didn't bother me. But he became afraid. The chief psychologist was like, "Oh, he's doing something that's against departmental policy." He suspected that I was experimenting with inmates without departmental permission, and I wouldn't have got any kind of departmental permission.
Right.
So I'd been doing this for years before these guys started recovering.
Well, besides, protecting their jobs and their paychecks, what do you think might be going on with these guys if they don't want you to help heal the patients?
Well, I watched them, and my supervisor was pacing back and forth like he was possessed.
Mm.
He was really upset that these guys were recovering, and that blew my mind. I'm like, why is that? Why is that?
Maybe, like I said, he works for the other side, right? He's upset
Well,
that you're taking their food away because it's his food too.
maybe. It surprised me that he was upset.
Mm.
So, apparently, this fellow also had some contact with the good side, the positive side. So I said, when the positive side does come, what do they say? He said, they tell me to keep praying, to be strong. My mother tells me she loves me and that God loves me and to be strong. My mother tells me that she is in a better place. How often do they come through? A couple of times a day. Do they say anything else? He said, not much. They say, keep praying and ask if I want their help in prayer. I'd say, seems you have gained some ground by going to church. Do you miss the voices at all? He said, no.
The bad or the good voices? So he doesn't miss.
No, they were talking about the bad voices.
Right. Okay.
Let me see what I wrote here.
Have some of the patients said they missed the voices?
Yes, I had one that we completely got rid of them. He was from New York, and what surprised me about him was that he'd been hearing them. He was married for decades, and he'd been hearing the voices for decades, and he successfully hid them from his wife for that length of time. She never knew about it. So he would go out into the garage and he would talk to the voices out loud, and she caught him a couple of times, and he'd say, "Oh, I was just thinking to myself. I was just talking to myself." And the voices hated her.
No
They absolutely hated. They hate wives. They hate husbands. They want the family completely broken up. They want the victim isolated. So it's just the voices in them. So they'll do everything they can to drive off girlfriends. They'll tell girlfriends that the boys, their boyfriends cheating on them. They'll tell the women that the men are cheating on them. They'll tell husbands the wives are cheating on them. They'll do everything they can to break up the family.
So why did this guy say he missed the voices then?
Well, the guy that I was not, it's not this guy here.
Right.
It was another guy because he had no social skills. He'd been hearing the voices for decades, and when they disappeared, I remember he was disoriented. He almost fell out of his chair. And then the first words out of his mouth were, "The silence is deafening." And he just sat there dazed. It's the first time that he had heard silence in decades. So the reason he missed him, he didn't have social skills. He didn't trust anybody. And we'd gotten rid of the voices. And before I left the unit, I stopped in. He was working motor vehicle. So he's answering the phone calls for motor vehicle. And I asked him, I said, how you doing with the voices? He said, I asked for them to come back because I was lonely.
Oh, nice. And he was still married, this fellow.
No, he was divorced. I mean, matter of fact, the voices, when the wife finally told him, said, I'm fed up with you. I want a divorce. He was happy. You know, he showed no remorse at all. He was happy about it. And when she saw that reaction, she just skinned him alive. She took the house, she took everything. And he ended up homeless, eating out of garbage cans in New York City. And I said, well, didn't that bother you? He said, no, I preferred that. He was sleeping in places with newspapers as blankets. He said he knew all the best restaurants to go where he could dig in the trash and get the food they threw out at night. He didn't have to work. He stayed away from people. He said he preferred that kind of life, which blew me away.
Well, I guess to each their own, as they say. But he wasn't a psychiatric patient. He was just working there, and then he ended up, as you just mentioned.
Well, the guy whose wife whose wife divorced him in New York, he was a big time guy on the stock market. You know, he was making a 6-figure salary.
Is this the guy that ended up in the garbage bins?
Yes.
I'm not surprised. I used to work as a stockbroker, and I met lots of people. You know, it seemed to me they were all possessed. Right? You just get possessed in a way to make money, which is a different sort of possession. You know, because they're not nice people generally, which is why I kind of stopped working in that industry. And I guess then they get possessed in a different way into the garbage bins. That's interesting.
So here I was poking into his head about see, one thing they didn't understand, they didn't even notice that when the voices came that their energy level dropped for the most part.
So we're talking about the guy in the prison again now.
Well, talking about in general.
Oh, okay.
You know, it's most of them just like, okay, I'm feeling bad. The voices are there. You know, they didn't realize that when the voices showed up, their energy level dropped.
Why do you think that is? I mean,
well, I don't think the voices wanted them to notice that.
I mean, I notice it. You know, I have these experiences. Let's say I'm not a schizophrenic, but let's say I can tell when I hear the crazy voices and I get angry. Let's say I'll have a fight with my wife or something like that. We've had these conversations. My wife's very intelligent that way. She'll say, you know, the reason we don't argue anymore, I don't want to argue, is, you know, I get eaten by those voices, and then I know the next day I have a shitty, low energy sort of day. And we both go, yeah, it's true. You know, your inspiration's gone, your get up and go is gone, your desire to be alive and happy seems to be gone. Why do you, I mean, I notice it, I guess. Have you had any experiences like that on a personal level?
Oh yeah. Yeah. You know, when I got angry, when I got into arguments with my wife, yeah.
It's interesting.
It's drained.
So what do you think's different between men like us and men like them? Like, I'll put you on the spot here, that notice the energy.
I think the voices don't want them to notice. So, you know, it was like, here I'm asking this guy, I said, after several times of the voices coming and your energy consistently disappearing. So this happened to him by the time I was working with him. This has happened to him thousands of times. You know, and he may have noticed it. I asked him, you know, I asked him several times, what happened to your energy that where it consistently disappears thousands of times after the voices appeared?
Right.
He would answer, I don't know. And then finally, one day I asked him again, and he goes, they take it? You know, it's kind of like it dawned on him that there's a link between the voices attacking him and they taking. But he wasn't quite sure. And I said, well, what do you think? And he said, they must have taken it, he responded it. But why would they want it, he asks. I said, can you see a clear correlation between the voices coming and you feeling drained and depressed? He said, yeah, they drain me when I'm alone. So what these things do, they do the same thing as farmers do to cows. They
Of
put the
course.
cows out into the field, they eat the grass, then they bring the cow in, they isolate it, and they drain the milk, and then they turn it back out to pasture again. That's the same thing these things are doing to us.
I Jerry, can I ask you a personal question, if I may?
Sure.
You don't have to answer. Oh, so I'm just like curious, right? Being, man to man here. So you hear the voices, I've heard the voices. They milk you when you get angry or you have a fight. And you've made some suggestions with some of your patients or ex-patients how they can stop allowing the voices to eat them. Like what's your strategy on a personal level? When, let's say, you're about to have an argument with your wife and the voices say, hey, get angry, so this, that, and the other thing happens. How do you stop them from getting inside and eating your energy, let's say? What's your strategy?
Well, what I've been working with in my private practice, once I learned of it, probably 6 months or a quarter of 3/4 of a year now, is there's a new therapy that has come out, cutting edge stuff, that was invented by a ship captain of all people.
Right.
And this guy was he was a genius, and he was trying to piece together how the mind worked. So when I found out about this, I bought the books, and then the way it came about was, because of the videos I've been putting out, a fellow named Brian contacted me one day, and he sent me an email, and he goes, I got somebody you need to meet. And I get a lot of strange emails, and the ones that are curious, I'll look them up and see if I
Sure.
can't get them to speak out in public.
Mm.
But this guy wasn't asking anything of me. He other than, I got somebody you want to meet, and he said at the very worst, you'll be talking to a happy grandmother type figure, So that got my interest up, and I went, oh, okay, let's go with this and see what happens. And it turns out that this lady was the chief MACE training person for the MACE energy system in Australia.
Mm.
And I had no idea who I would be talking to. So we went round and round and round, and she started telling me about this system, and then she actually ran some sessions on me, and I could feel the difference.
Mm.
So after I grilled her half to death, and she ran some free sessions, I said, this works. It works, and it works fast, and it works quickly, and it goes in there, and it actually dissolves the emotional charge around the trauma that these things feed off of.
Right. You mean as it's happening, or in your past as an
Yeah,
experience?
in the past, it's where these things exist is in the energy universe. They don't exist in physical reality. They
Right.
have an effect on physical reality. So there's, it's akin to a magnetic field.
Mm.
You can't see it, you can't feel it, you can't touch it, you can't taste it. For all practical purposes, you can't sense it.
Mm.
You get a jar of iron filings and you put it on the magnetic field, then you can see it.
Right.
All right. The same thing with these voices. They are not, there's no time, there's no space, there's no matter where they are. But they can be impacted by non-physical things.
Mm.
And the only reason the medications work and they're impacted by that is because they're doping the guy half to death.
Mm.
He's so doped up he can't react to them. So after a number of MACE sessions, I rarely get upset anymore.
All right, so we took a bit of a break. 1 second, as you see, Jerry has a hat now, and I have less light on my face. So we're going into the second hour of our chat here, which is very interesting. And we are discussing a specific prison case when Jerry was working there, and we've segued a little bit into how you can work to maybe heal these voices if you're having a similar experience. And so maybe you could tell me a little bit more about the MACE sessions and your experiences with them.
there's more. You need to know more about the voices, but what the May sessions do is the voices feed off of trauma.
Right.
So you have to get rid of that trauma, and that's been with traditional psychotherapy. That's been very difficult. You can bring it up, you can talk about it all you want, but it doesn't get rid of it.
Gotcha.
You go, okay, I understand it's there, but it doesn't get rid of the emotional charge. So we're talking about things that are happening in what John Mace would call the energetic universe. So thoughts are energy, memory is energy. It's all energy, and it doesn't belong to the physical universe, and it doesn't play by the same rules as the physical universe. So, nobody's ever pulled the thought out of anybody's head. Nobody's ever, captured one of these voices and said, "Here it is." It all belongs to the energy universe where there's no time, there's no space, and there's no material. So trying to get rid of these voices by pouring Thorazine into the guy's body is like pouring Thorazine on a magnetic field. It may gum them up, and because it gums up the brain is kind of like a receiver.
Right.
But it's the spirit that does all the processing. It does the thinking. It does the planning. It does the responding. John Mace found that the mind itself, the sole function of the mind is to create a picture of where you put your attention.
Makes sense.
So I don't know. I remember one time where I did a light dose of LSD, and I remember swinging my arm like that, and the picture went boom, 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 boom. And when I heard that, I went, shoot, that's what it is. It's the mind that takes pictures of where you put your attention. So
I would agree. How did you heal the trauma? How do you discharge the trauma charge? So to speak?
What he found out is that if the mind will make a picture of, it can make a picture of a concept or a feeling. Okay. And once it makes that picture of a concept or feeling, then you can get rid of it. So the basic premise is that your spirit is positive. It's not polluted. So like he says, a magnetic field is not polluted. Electricity is not polluted. Gravity is not polluted. They're pure forms of energy.
Okay.
And your spirit is a pure form of positive energy in its natural state. And positive energy will attract negative energy. So, and that's the same way with electricity. It flows from negative to positive. So what Mace found out was that if you can turn a feeling or a concept into an image, and then you focus the person's attention on it, the positive spirit will absorb the energy out of it and take it back to itself. And that will discharge or discreate the energy from the negative trauma. He found that virtually all psychological disorder is due to trauma.
So let's say you had like a traumatic experience. Your father hit you in the head when you were 6 because you stole an apple, whatever. So that would be something you'd have to reimagine that situation from the picture you took in your.
Right. It's still there as if it never went anywhere. It didn't go anywhere. It still exists in the energetic universe. So what happens is when you run into a trauma, it's like when you burn your hand. You put your hand on a hot stove. You don't think about taking it off. You just automatically take it off. It's like like that. You don't think about it. Oh well, maybe I should take my hand off the stove.
No.
Well, it's the same thing when you run into a trauma. When you run into a very strong negative feeling, the ego don't like that. It wants to get rid of it as soon as possible. A very strong negative feeling from a trauma is akin to burning your hand on the stove psychologically.
Okay.
So it takes that and it wants to get rid of it, and it buries it. It buries it alive. So you don't have to keep feeling that negative feeling. So in order to bury it, you have to resist it. It takes energy to resist it and keep it buried and out of consciousness, so it isn't constantly coming up over and over and over again.
Right.
So what Mace has done is he's figured out a way to get the spirit to show us where these things are buried. And that took years. I mean, he spent his entire career researching this. It was decades and decades piecing together, like I did with the voices, piecing together how this worked. So you can get the spirit to show you where that thing is buried, right? And
Gotcha.
then go and discreate it, because you're the one that created it in the first place. So and what happens is it happens so fast that you're not even aware that it's buried. And then once it's buried, you're not aware of it, but it affects your behavior. So if you ever, everybody's got somebody that there's this one person that, a kind of person that you hate. No matter where you go, that kind of person shows up somewhere.
For sure.
All right. That's a negative identity that you had buried from some time in your past with a person with those personality traits. So what happens when they come onto the scene, they threaten to uncover that buried trauma. And you develop a personality to deal with these kind of people. So the kind of jerk that you really hate, when you run into one of them, you turn into a different kind of person. To deal with them, you either drive them away, or you avoid them, or you figure out ways to just get them out of your face and away from you, or you leave. Because they're setting off that buried trauma. Okay, so that's a negative identity that vibrates at the same level as that guy that's threatening you. But once you discreate that trauma, all the energy goes back to you.
So do you think the voices like are familiar with where you've buried all your bad treasures, so to speak?
Yeah. Oh yeah. See,
So
that's why this stuff works so good. They can constantly set off what you have buried. They have access to your mind, to everything in there, because they're energetic. Now, one thing they do is they try to disguise themselves as your own thoughts, which makes them very dangerous, because we're all told from the time we grow up that every thought that comes into your head belongs to you. No. These voices don't belong to you. And one of the biggest discoveries that schizophrenics can make is that the voices aren't who they are. They're invaders. They're coming in from somewhere else. They don't belong to them. They don't think like them. They don't act like the person wants to act, and their intention is very different. And they run a series of patterns over and over and over again. Now, psychiatry is like, oh, we hereby declare that the voices are hallucinations, and that's all there is to it. Anybody who looks into it is a wacko. They're never going to get the answer to what causes schizophrenia doing that. They don't know what causes schizophrenia. They said for years, and this was made up by a pharmaceutical industry trying to explain why their drugs work, because they had no idea why their drugs worked. None. So they made something up. They wanted to be like real doctors that give, like an antibiotic prescription, and then the infection goes away. So they wanted to, we give our drugs, and then, the schizophrenia it doesn't go away. It's just buried. The symptoms are suppressed. None of their medicines cure anything. All they do is suppress symptoms, and at great cost to the physical body.
For sure.
Well, the mace can get in there, and it can get in there, and it can get rid of those traumas. So the person is free of them, leaving just the spirit that the person originally came with. So any mental illness is caused by those negative identities. And there's positive identities also. You have a positive identity as a broadcaster. You have a positive identity as a car driver or motorcycle driver or whatever you do. I mean, there's
Sure.
different kinds of identities. It's the negative identities that you don't know about that affect your behavior the most drastically because you're not aware of them. You react instead of respond.
Hmm.
So as soon as I saw what this stuff does, I adopted it for my practice. And it's amazing how fast it works and how quickly it works. And it doesn't seem to make any intuitive sense for the person who's undergoing it because they're playing around with images. They're playing around with feelings, concepts, and images. It's all energetic work.
Hmm.
There's nothing physical to it.
Interesting. Interesting. So this was when you were talking with the fellow going back to the prison case, this was before, I guess, you developed this sort of
Yeah, no, I had no idea. This was basically trying to figure out what the voices were, how they operated, and what I could do to interfere with them. And prayer interferes with them. They do not like it. So one of the ground rules I used was anything they didn't like, give them more of it. They start complaining about this or that, or they don't like it, give them more of it. Now that didn't work out real well in the state hospital because it upset these guys. In the prison, they're all about dealing with upset people. The upset people is the norm, not the minority.
how would you tie the mace system into the praying, getting rid of the monsters? Is there a connection there, do you think?
There doesn't appear to be a direct connection because the prayer does not get rid of the negative identities that the people have formed. Okay. What it does is it acts directly on the voices who don't like it. So it's kind of like bug spray. You give the ant colony enough spray, it drives them off. It makes the atmosphere that they operate in intolerable.
Okay.
And they will react against it. They do not like people praying. They'll do what they can to stop it. Any other questions about mace?
Well, it's very interesting. So like how do you specifically go in and uncharge the negative charges? Right? Is it a meditative
Well,
technique? Is it like, let's go back to
no.
the 6-year-old that got hit because he stole an apple as
Well,
an example.
once you find out what the trauma is, there's two parts to it.
Okay.
There's the actual trauma and the negative identity that the person has created
Okay. So
to
let's
deal
say
with the trauma. And the second part is the feeling that they're stuck with
so let's say
during that trauma.
so let's say the little boy then said, "I'm a bad boy because I stole an apple," right? So that was his. Identity that he hid,
Yeah, that's a negative identity. And then so as soon as he does that, you're like, okay, that's negative identity. You've dropped into the negative identity. The negative identity is what the personality that the person has developed to deal with the situation. Okay, so now let's say, okay, he got beat up for stealing an apple. There's going to be a residue there. Anytime he sees an authority figure with an apple or something to that effect, there's going to set him off, or somebody acting that way. So they develop a separate personality to deal with that kind of person.
right.
Right.
Okay.
Then you go in there and you dissolve that personality and the traits that it has, and then you dissolve the feeling. So what happens is when Mace found that the mind can form images of feelings and concepts. And once it forms an image, what it does is it rips it out of the negative identity that's tied to the spirit. It separates it, and then you can dissolve it. Otherwise, it's bound in there.
mean, I'm assuming you've read some of the Castaneda books. I think we touched base on this
I've read
before.
them all
I'll read
several
them all,
times over. Yeah.
right? And they talks about recapitulation. It sounds very similar to me. And like going back over your experiences and reclaiming the
Yeah.
bad energies, but
Yeah.
using.
Yeah. Right. But it's more than that. It's more than just thinking about the bad things that happen to you.
Sure.
It's going in there and dissolving the emotional charge and the negative identity that's associated with that.
Okay.
It would be
Well, I know Castaneda was more than thinking about it. I mean, I can only talk from my experience. It is really reliving the experience, right?
yeah.
To going back there to seeing what was good, what was bad. Maybe your father wasn't as bad as you thought. I mean, I guess there's many ways to um, discharge the charge by.
Well, that wouldn't do it um, alone, because you can think back on bad memories that you've had. The feeling is still there.
No, I mean go back and relive them, not think back on them.
Well,
Actually,
they're still alive. If you don't discharge them, they're still
right,
alive. See, because there is no time in the energy universe.
right.
That whatever happened to you is still happening in that energy universe at that moment. It's still there.
Okay, so I'm a little confused. How does he discharge them then? How do you discharge? So let's say
Well,
you're at that. Yeah.
like I said, once you can get the mind to form an image
Okay.
of, okay, say uh, a trauma happened. What is the major feeling that permeated that trauma? Okay, you get that, right? They say, okay, it's terror.
Okay.
Okay, and then you have the person close their eyes and form an image of that terror. What does it look like?
Hmm.
Just really feel it. What does it look like? Paint a picture of it. And then once they have an image, then there's a decoupling of that feeling from the personality. And then you go after it and dissolve that image. So by focusing their attention on it while feeling it, okay, you're actually allowing the spirit to absorb the energy back into itself. So it's like I don't know, how would you say it? It's almost like there's a transfer of energy going on,
So,
and it's moving from the negative, just like electricity, moving from the negative pole to the positive pole. And once that's created, and that image is gone, disappeared,
mhm.
then that negative identity is also gone.
So I guess you would say they have to go refeel the original trauma, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, they have to go back and revisit it, and they have to
Gotcha.
keep their attention focused on it. Now, Castaneda was going, "Oh, just go back and remember it."
No, no, I would disagree. He totally said you have to go back and relive it. But that's my like
Oh, okay.
I read.
If he
Yeah.
said that, then that's good, but you have to stick with it.
No, the only
It's
reason
not
I'm
it's not it's not just reliving it. It's keeping your attention on it
right.
until it's gone.
Yeah. No, it's just interesting. I'm not trying to be combative or anything. It's just, I've done a full recapitulation and Mace sounds very similar, maybe different wording, but similar techniques in if you do an authentic, recapitulation. I've done, my own trauma healing and it sounds very similar, but with, just different words. So, that's why I'm kind of asking so many questions.
No, feel free. Yeah, I remember the recapitulation. It was kind of like go back and visit, but I don't remember him saying stick with it. I
Oh
don't
yeah.
remember that.
Whole life I've seen like as to go back like I to do it consistently constantly and never ending so to speak in your life to revisit what's traumatized you, right, and to go through
Well,
it and to yeah.
the thing with that is that you will only get the stuff that you remember. And it's not the stuff that you remember that causes the problems. It's the stuff that's subconsciously buried that causes the problems.
I hear
So
you.
it doesn't do the same thing. It's the stuff that's buried that you're not aware of that causes the problems. The stuff that you're aware of, you can do something about.
Of
It's the stuff
course.
that you're not aware of that is causing the problems.
Well,
And that's the difference.
I agree. Maybe we just have a different definition of recapitulation, but I think it's very similar from
Oh,
what you've said with
it's
Mace. Yeah.
similar, but it's different also.
Okay. So how do you tie this in? So we're back to the prison fellow, let's say. So you were doing your session with him
I
back,
had no idea that Mace existed at the time I was doing this stuff.
right,
None.
right.
So I'm still exploring, kind of going what's going on, you know. So here I'm asking him about let me say it starts out here. He suspected the headaches that he was getting were caused by demons, but wasn't sure. So when he started praying, he would get headaches.
Hmm.
After being asked several times what happened to his energy that consistently disappeared thousands of times after the voices appeared, he finally answered, "They take it," and he wasn't quite sure. And I asked him, "What do you think?" And he said, "They must have taken it."
Hmm.
But why would they want it? He asks. And I said, can you see a clear correlation between the voices coming and you feeling drained or depressed? He said, yeah, they drain me when I'm alone. And I explained to him about the cows, that they're doing the same thing to him as we do to cows. So they consume the energy. And I said, how long has this cycle been going on with the voices coming and his energy disappearing? And he said, for years. And I asked him, do you have any friends you socialize with? He said, no. So it's pretty well you and the voices. Uh, you're isolating yourself from everyone, just like the farmer isolates the cows. So can you see any similarity between how the farmers milk their cows and what the voices are doing to you? Um, he said, let me see. He starts getting a headache now. He starts complaining about a headache. Uh, and then,
While you were talking to him at the time.
yeah.
Hmm.
And he said they couldn't be making it those things if they were anything. I don't know. They couldn't be making it those things if anything are mental. All right. The voices become like a part of yourself. This guy says you get used to the pain and the abuse, and it becomes normal.
Hmm.
And I asked him, I said, you mean it's like you don't feel you're worth a damn and deserve to be punished? And these things take care of that need? He says, exactly. Then you wonder who is you and who is them. So that's one of the first battles a schizophrenic has to fight is which thoughts belong to them and which thoughts belong to the voices, since the voices are inserting thoughts into their mind. And those voices are consistent. Those thoughts are consistently negative. They're consistently running the victim down. They're consistently running down everybody around him. And their intention is different than the intention the person has for themselves.
That's for sure.
And this guy says, it feels like you have a big hole in you. You become so used to them that it becomes very difficult to change. Then you wonder if you can survive with the piece of yourself left. You don't feel whole. It's like a big piece of yourself is missing and everything changes.
So basically, you were talking with them, I guess, about discernment, like figuring out which thoughts are theirs and which thoughts are the monsters, and so which ones to follow and which ones to ignore, so to speak.
Well,
Is
I
that the
think
strategy?
one of the things that the voices don't like is, and this was when I was working the 10 years I worked psych crisis in the emergency rooms, is I was trying to figure out the quickest way to get them the most information without them going off and getting me in trouble with psychiatry. So
Right.
I had to go, how much can this guy handle, and how much can I give him without setting him off? And one of the things that I found important to get through to them, and that the voices reacted to the most vehemently, was that the voices were stealing their energy, that they were parasites.
So when you mentioned that to them, the
They
voices
went
didn't like
nuts.
that.
The
Of
voices
course.
went nuts.
Of
They went
course.
nuts. You know, so if you had a leech on you, you wouldn't just sit there and watch the leech suck you. You'd do something about it. So once they realized that the voices are stealing their energy, then they have an enemy. It's not, see, the psychiatry, when they say, oh, it's you, your brain is broken, it's all your fault,
Yeah.
there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing with that kind of mentality. There is nothing they can do about it. They're trapped in hell forever.
Mm.
it's a very hopeless message. It's a very disgusting message.
It is.
It's like, oh, you're helpless. The only thing you can do is take our toxic drugs. Now take the drugs and get out of here.
Of
You know,
course.
they're not the least bit curious about the voices. But once the person figures out that these things are parasites, then they can't be them. Because it's their energy that's being taken. It's their energy that's going missing, and it's not them who is taking it. They're feeling its loss. So they know something is stealing their energy from them, and it's not who they are. So making that dichotomy, breaking that dichotomy of what the voices are and what they're doing, and making the person realize that they are not them. The voices are not who they are, is one of the biggest things that they have to do first before they can start fighting back. They have to break that idea that those negative thoughts belong to them, and it's who they are. Like we're all taught from the time we're kids that every thought that comes into your mind belongs to you, because who else could it belong to?
So how
That's how they think.
How does the mace system tie in with the voices being demons?
Well, I'll tell you what, when I work with schizophrenics with the mace system, the voices show up and try to distract the person from forming the images. They don't like it. But what the mace system does is after we teach the person hearing voices what they are and how they operate, and some things that they can do about them, then the mace system goes in there and starts removing the trauma that they've accumulated over the years. And schizophrenics, for the most part, have a lot of trauma.
Right. So they use the mace system to get rid of the trauma. You mean the people, right? It's like a tool.
They can't use it on themselves. It's like you can't be an image and see an image at the same time. You either see the image or you can't. Anything you look at isn't you. Look around. Is anything around you?
I have a different opinion on that. I think you can do both, but that's just my experiences. I mean, maybe you can see yourself and the image at the same time.
Can you see yourself right now? Other than, if you look at the curtain behind you, can you see yourself?
Yeah, depends whether you mean physically or with my feelings, but I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, what you look at is the mind takes pictures.
But I mean, are they using the mace?
Those pictures are not you.
Because what I'm saying is, so the schizophrenics, you are encouraging them to understand that there's two voices, at least inside them. The good one that comes from them or their higher selves, and the other one that comes from the demons. And once they start to realize that one is not friendly to them, that it is eating them, they're more on the road to healing themselves.
Right.
It kind of sounds like, this kind of what you said. So does the mace system, maybe there's not a connection, help them understand the two voice paths?
What the mace system does is it removes the trauma that the voices feed off of. But so there's a bunch of negative identities.
Right.
With schizophrenics have a lot of traumas, and each one of those traumas is associated with a negative identity. So they start losing control of themselves because they're set off by everything.
How does the person have to participate with the mace system for it to work?
They have to be able to form an image. They have to be able to form an image of a feeling and concepts.
Right. So does it get into the voices being from two different sources?
No, they look more at the negative identities, which aren't voices. They're the voice in your head when you come up and say, "Oh, I really screwed up." That I'm really stupid. That's a negative identity.
Oh, right. Okay. So I guess it's
potato, or something that triggers you over and over again.
Right.
Like a decision with each trauma. What happens is your attention focuses inward on yourself. So any decision you make about what part you played in that trauma, who you are in relation to that trauma, is negative. You can't make a happy decision when you're in the middle of a traumatic situation.
That's for sure.
So your decision is going to mirror the state of mind you were in the trauma.
Hmm.
So it's like something, with people or girls who were sexually molested. They might go, well, it's my fault. Somehow I caused it. They didn't cause it, but they believe that because that's what the decision they made at the time. I shouldn't have gone in there. It's my fault. So they blame themselves for the rest of their lives for that, when
Right.
it had nothing to do with them, really. So the negative identities are negative thoughts you have about yourself. And
Right. And so the monsters ride that, they use that,
they
or they
ride
become
that. They ride that.
right.
They trigger it. They know where to trigger it. They go, yeah, look at what you did there. You're so stupid. You remember the time you did this, and they'll trigger that identity, that
Right.
negative identity. Well,
Right.
and you did that. You remember that? Yeah, yeah, and they'll trigger that. So they keep triggering those negative identities, which causes an emotional reaction, and then they take the energy from it.
Right.
So if
Pushing.
you start removing those negative identities, they have less and less to feed on.
Makes sense. I guess your pain points, so to speak.
Your pain points, the damages that have been done to you by all the traumas we all face during our lifetimes.
Interesting. Yeah, I think we might be talking about similar things, just with different words, but it's interesting. I like what the MACE system does. It makes it, in my opinion, maybe more approachable for people to get in
Well,
there
yeah,
and heal themselves.
well, they actually do the healing themselves when they're focusing on the images.
Right, right. Okay, that makes
I
sense.
I'm not doing. I'm kind of guiding them, but I'm not doing the healing. They do that themselves.
Okay, that was my question. Yes. So, okay, good. I'm happy to hear that, actually.
Yeah, yeah. That's nothing. I'm kind of telling them what to do,
Mm,
but they have to do it. And if they can't form an image, there's nothing I can do for them.
right. Makes sense.
And there's some people I've had to tell that. Well, if you can't form an image, there's nothing I can do for you.
For sure.
Yeah.
They were there when the pain was made. I guess they have to be there present when it's unmade.
Yep. They have to go back to it. And then if they're not willing to do that, then they're going to have to just take their meds.
So, going back to the fellow in prison, it's interesting that they were in tents, I guess, outside. It must have been a warmer part of the United States that they were living
Oh,
in
it's
at the
hot.
time.
It's hot as Hades in those tents. All they had was evaporative coolers in there.
So what happened with the fellow at the end, or getting
Yeah,
towards
what?
the end? That fellow, that we're talking to, the case that we're
Yeah.
reading, so how did things turn out with him for you?
Well, the voices left.
Oh, really? So,
And yeah, they after he kept hammering at them, hammering at them, breaking up the patterns that they ran, figuring out different things to do with them. They left. They finally weakened and left.
how long did you chat with him? Like how long
It wasn't. It was like months. It was like 6 months. Back then I didn't know as much as I know now about how to get rid of these things. I
Mm.
was still experimenting and trying things out. Try this and come back and tell me how it worked. What did the voices say? What are they telling you right now?
Have you have any, let's say now that you're a different person and you've, developed your own special relationship with the Mace method, have you had any contact with any of these old people? Have they come back into your life in one way or another? Any of
You
these
mean the prisoners I worked with back then?
yeah, has anything happened? Have you heard about them? Do you get emails? Have you indirectly figured out something out? Or it's just was an
No.
experience and then no. All
Yeah,
right.
once they're gone, no. I haven't had any contact with any of the ones I've worked with.
So it's interesting, you had your experiences, I guess, back in crazy circumstances, finding out that we are being farmed, for our negative emotions, and it's taking you to where you are, where you're helping people get over their negative emotions if they're willing to do the work for themselves. So I really applaud the kind of work that you're doing, Jerry, and it's why I've wanted to talk to you personally so many times. Is for me, it's been my own life's experience as well to figure that out for myself, and in my way, what I'm sharing to help people to maybe pick up those pieces so they can also heal themselves, because I think that's what good men do personally. So, I appreciate your work. I just want to say that. I'm not sure I got a chance to say that in our last few conversations.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's been a long, hard road And the friggin' psychiatric mafia is still at it. There's nothing you can do about schizophrenia. Nobody, it's a life sentence. It is not a life sentence. I've had maybe a handful of people who've fully recovered. A lot of them have got better, and they go, okay, I can handle this on my own, and kind of disappeared. But the fact that a handful fully recovered shows that it's possible.
Mm. Great.
And I've got people I'm working with now where two of them have fully recovered.
That's amazing. I think maybe as usually goes with good conversations, we may change the topic to buried alive and how to unbury yourself or something of that nature, because it seems to me that you started working with people that had buried themselves, and you've discussed how they can get themselves better, perhaps start digging out and coming full circle to your life where you're literally working with people to help them unbury themselves from being buried alive from their trauma to live better lives. So that's
so their lives changed drastically for the better.
I mean, I know you've done the That's a Lie program, with Sherry Swiney, and you wrote that other book, the schizophrenic mind one, the psychotic mind, a journey into the psychotic mind.
Yeah, it's this one right here.
Yeah, let's show everyone that. And
we've recently got that translated into German, and it's being translated into Spanish right now.
Oh, that's amazing. I'd recommend maybe a Japanese translation one day. I'm sure they can. I'm sure they can use it in this part of the world. I know it wouldn't be easy, but
I wouldn't even know how to approach something like that. It's bad enough with German.
Maybe I can help you one day. There's at least 120 million people here, and I've met a lot of them that I think could certainly use a book like this. A journey into the psychotic mind and how they can get better, because there's a certain special something going on over the last few years that are helping people become more psychotic, I would say, through the challenges that are going across the world. And maybe there's a few of them, like myself and some of the people you and I have met, that are willing to do the work to get over that.
Well, it's increasing. You look at the suicide rate is up to 47,000 a year. There are 50,000 people killed in Vietnam. 47,000 people in the United States are killing themselves each year. And somewhere around 1 million are making a suicide attempt. The murder rate is just astronomical also. I have these figures somewhere. People aren't getting any better. No, they're getting worse.
They are.
And these drugs are not helping anything. They're not curing anything. All they're doing is suppressing the symptoms. That's it.
I know. I read somewhere where the suicide rate in Japan, they don't talk about it here, has gone up like 10 times over the last couple of years, than what it used to be. It's like, you hear about it outside of this crazy country, but you don't hear about it here. And then, when I told my wife about that, she was shocked, because of course, I think they keep some of the news away from the people that need it the most in the countries where it's affecting them the most. So, that's where we get to do these bridges together, by sharing what you're doing, by sharing what I'm doing. And, it's a great message to leave people with. So I appreciate that there is help, there's hope, that they can't sit and hit a gong and hope that they're going to get healed by, taking some drugs or allowing someone else to do it for them. But if they're willing to do some of the hard work by facing their own traumas and, dispersing them, we'll say, or dispersing those charges. So is there anything you'd like to leave our viewers with in this time? Number 5, buried alive and how to get out. Maybe that's the topic that we seem to have come across on this particular chat.
Well, we got a lot more information on my website.
Okay.
There's a way to contact me on the website. There's I think we have the That's a Lie program on the website. Okay. Because these voices are consummate liars. They lie about everything. You can't trust anything they say.
I would agree.
And I think I brought George on with you, didn't I?
Yes, we had
okay. Yeah. Well, I have another fella who is being plagued by these things right now, and he's constantly fighting with it. It happened while he was using psychotropic drugs. I mean, the psychoactive drugs. They were what do you call them? Like echinacea.
Ayahuasca, you mean?
Ayahuasca. But he was using DMT, and then he added something to it, and this thing got into him. And he might be willing to come and talk to you.
I would love to chat with him. I like the specifics on that. I've heard all kinds of other horror stories of people that say just take ayahuasca or just do DMT and you get healed. And of course, unless you do something from a position of power and a position of intention, you can do more damage than not by allowing crazy energies inside.
And I think that's his message, is to take that stuff without somebody who knows what they're doing guiding you. Could be very dangerous, and he can't get rid of this thing. It has very similar characteristics to the voices that this fellow was hearing, but it's different in a way that he's kind of come to some kind of agreement with it as to how far he will allow it to go.
So it's still living within him.
It's still living within him, and he can move out of the way, and that thing comes through.
Really?
I mean, his face changes. It gets distorted. He lunges at the screen. His jaw goes forward. You can see that he's not the same person that you were talking to just a few seconds before.
Well, this is interesting.
There's a list of like 23 patterns that these things run.
Right.
And I thought I had them. Hold on. Let me look around here. Yeah. What we found is that there's like 23 patterns that these voices run. And they're identical to what the mainstream media is hitting us with right now.
Oh.
The same entity on a macroscopic scale, one for one. The isolation, negative, instilling fear, and instilling uncomfortableness, attacking it, filling it with all this garbage that we're hearing over the mainstream right now. It's virtually identical, step by step.
Taking away loving interactions. Don't hug, don't see, don't look at your children.
Yep, exactly. Stay away from each other. Don't talk to one another. Cover your mouth. Be fearful of everything. You're being watched. It's the same entity. On a bigger scale.
I've seen people possessed by them when I've been on the train. I won't wear a mask on the train here, Jerry. And I've had people give me the finger. I've had people give me dirty looks. I've had, people scream almost. And this is a polite place in Japan where this never happened before this last few years. And
I did the same thing. I got thrown out about 3 or 4 stores. I got thrown out of Costco. People yelling at me. I had some old lady in the drugstore. I mean, I was, instead of being 6 feet away from her, I was 4 feet away. She turned on me and started screaming at me, and it's like.
Interesting. I think you and I have done work to be alive right now. It seems the devils or the demons are possessing people on a macro level, all over the place, from the top down and from the bottom up. And it's interesting to be living.
It's constant stoking of fear,
I hear you. Well, maybe we'll get into this on a macro level. If we do a number 6, mind monsters gone wild, if you're like, we can look at things from a bigger perspective together. Maybe then, because this time we went down to a case level. So maybe next time we can go up to the macro level on what's going on and things like that. I think it could be an interesting topic and a conversation, and maybe bring some other people on, if we're interested in having a 3-way or a 4-way conversation. But by all means, I'd be delighted to chat with you again.
I'll talk to him and see if he'd be willing to come on. I think he would.
Okay.
He wants to educate people as to how dangerous these drugs can be, because he's got that thing stuck in him now that he can't get rid of it. He's just kind of got a truce with it.
Facing the monsters and not wanting to be milked any longer, right? Not wanting to be prey to the demons that want to eat everyone and it seems like that's the topic of topics these days.
They hit us all. I mean, you're walking down the sidewalk and you just get this disgusting thought that comes out of nowhere. It's not your thought, because you're horrified by it. You wouldn't do anything like that. It's like, one preacher told me that he was standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon and he got this thought to jump, people saying, I wonder what it'd be like if I turned my car into oncoming traffic or jumped off a bridge.
I know. It's even as simple as every time I'm about to have a conversation with you, I hit him, don't talk to Jerry now. You're too tired. You've already, so many things. It says you're too exhausted. You've already done the talk. Nothing new's coming of it, blah, blah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you just got to go, shut the fuck up, right? And
Yeah.
and let's
Yeah.
and let's see what's going to happen. My wife said
Yeah.
shut the fuck out, which is interesting because I used to because her Japanese, and I said, it makes sense. You tell them to get out of your system. I saying shut the fuck
I
out.
do the
Yeah,
same thing. I do
yeah.
the same thing. I get the hell out of here.
Get the hell
You
out of
know?
here. Yeah. Helping people to free themselves from these monsters that seem to want to farm all of us into oblivion, or at least into cheese from the milk or
Well,
something.
the big thing is for people to know that they exist.
I agree.
And that the voices that schizophrenics hear are not hallucinations, and they don't come from a chemical imbalance that they've never proven, and then some friggin' drug company made up to sell drugs and then sold the lie to the medical schools, to the doctors, to the psychiatrists, to psychology students, to the educational institutions, and they've taken over the Congress too to foster laws for their own benefit, not for ours.
Of course, that's what the monsters do. They trick everyone into being prey. And I don't mean P-R-A-Y, I mean P-R-E-Y. That's for
right.
sure. Right. Well, Jerry, thank you so much. This has been great. I appreciate you allowing me to ask some of the harder questions and to give me some great answers as well. So thank you so much for that. I always wanted to get a little more personal in these, when we chat it next. So, thank you for allowing that to come through in this conversation. And I will leave Jerry's information below, his contact to his website, where everything he mentioned will be there for further studies. If anyone has any questions or suggestions for further chats, let us know. Like, subscribe. I'm happy to have Jerry back again. It seems like we will do a part 6, and we'll see where that's going to take us. And thank you again, Jerry. I appreciate your time here.
Okay, thanks for having me. It's guys like you that are going to help us get this out, because it isn't going to come out through the mainstream media, and it's not going to come out through psychology or psychiatry.
No way.
It has to come up from the bottom up, where people, and I get letters all the time. You're right on. You're exactly what happened to me.
I mean, I hear you. I mean, it's people like us that supposedly aren't professional newscasters or broadcasters or big whatever's, that their hearts are in the place where, I know you and I don't really get paid for doing this, so to speak. I mean, you do your work, I do our work, but this is all like on a volunteer basis, and it's a lot of work. People don't understand, being on and talking and chatting and putting yourself out there, and then sharing it, and all the other things that goes into video making. So of course, it'll be on Jerry's channel as well, after we get this up, and it'll be on my channel. And so all of you here, please like, subscribe, share more, and I'm hoping to see you again very soon. And I love you all very much. And I can talk for Jerry perhaps when I say we both appreciate you doing the work to heal yourself and help make the world better for all of us.
Adios.
Can't make me lie to my heart. No one tells me where I should start. Freedom first is what I say.